Okay, so let's dive into some FPP. So just a reminder, when we're working with foundation paper piecing, we're stitching on the front and we're attaching the fabric to the back. So it's actually a reverse image. So even though this is the left canopy, it's looking like it's pointing right, but when you flip it, that will mean it's pointing left. So just keep that in mind as you're working on your templates. So I have my left and I have my right canopies ready to go. And the first step is always to start with your A1 pieces. So A1 or B1, C1, whatever it is, you always want to start with the number 1. What I like to do is actually pull out a glue stick and just put a dab of glue right where you see your A1 piece. I want to go right in the center of there and just put a little bit of glue. You don't need a lot, just a little bit. It will just help secure your place. It will help secure your piece in place so that it doesn't shift around on you. Now what I'm looking to do is take my A1 piece, right side facing up, so good side up, and I want to make sure that I place it in a way where I'm covering the entire A1 piece. So I want to make sure I'm covering the entire A1 section plus the seam allowance. So the seam allowance is where you see the dotted line. So you want to make sure that your A1 piece is covering the entire perimeter, including the seam allowance. Now what you want to do is you can flip your sheet up. And so I can see that I'm off a little bit, so I'm just going to shimmy it over and stick it down a little bit and flip it back over. And if you're having a hard time seeing whether your piece is covering your entire seam, what you can do is put it up against a window, or you can use a light box, or you can even pull it up to a lamp and just lay it on top just to see that whether your fabric is covering that entire area. And so when I look at this and I kind of hold it up to the light, I can see that I'm actually a little bit shy down at the bottom here. So I'm actually going to shimmy it down just a little bit. And actually, I'm just going to need a little bit more glue. So your A1 piece, you want to make sure that you really get it in the right spot. So I'm taking my time with this one. I have made the piece large just to give you lots of wiggle room, but I don't want you to rely too heavily on that. Once I have my A1 piece nicely aligned, then I'm going to flip my paper over, being gentle not to move my A1 piece. And then what I'm going to do is come and find the line between A1 and A2. So we've got a small area here for A2 that we need to address. So what I'm going to do is come in with my cardstock and place it right along that line between A1 and A2. And then what I'm going to do is fold the paper back. Now being careful, again, because you've got some glued seams in there, you don't want to distort that. So you want to fold your paper back, get a nice crisp line, and then come in with a ruler and your rotary cutter and trim a quarter inch away from your folded back paper. So basically we need to leave ourselves seam allowance for joining our A2 piece. So I'm going to trim that. And then I'm going to come in and find my A2 piece, which you're going to have 2 of them because we're doing this twice, the right and left side, but starting with the left. Now, if you flip your template back over, you'll notice that the A2 area is down here. So again, we need to cover that whole entire A2 plus this seam allowance area. But we're on an angle, so things can get a little bit weird when we're stitching on an angle. So what I like to do is place my A2 piece and then bring it up. And what I'm doing is I can see through the paper, I can see my A2 unit there. And so I can see that it's coming, I've got a little bit of A2 extending, and I've got quite a bit of my A2 fabric extending this way, which is good because once it flips back over, this one comes up a little bit. So it takes a minute to kind of get used to it. And this is why I've made the pieces nice and large for you to give you lots of wiggle room. But once you're happy with the placement, you want to place your A2 right sides together and flush with your A1. And then you can come in and pop a pin. And now you're ready to take this to the sewing machine and stitch directly on that line between A1 and A2. And then I'm just going to pull in this is the left FPP that I'm working with here. And you'll notice that I'm coming at it from a little bit of a different angle, which is totally normal. And so I'm just going to, on this one, I will start within the seam allowance and finish right up in here. So I'll show you what that looks like. And then just lock in my seams. When it comes to pressing your FPP templates, there's a few things to keep in mind. You're working on paper, so steam might not be your friend because it could make your paper wet and distort it a little bit. So when it comes to FPP at this point, I actually don't use steam in my iron. I just go in with a dry iron. And what I like to do is always start by setting my seams. You know I'm a seam setter. I find that it really does help increase the accuracy in my stitching. So once I've set my seam, I then first start by finger pressing. And you always want to finger press to the new piece that you've added. So you're always pressing towards the new addition. Once I have that finger pressed, I will then take my iron and just set that seam. Again, I'm trying to just be gentle with my fabric. I'm trying not to pull on things and just really keep the integrity of the fabric and not distort my pattern. So there we go. We've got A1 and A2 done. Okay, so we've done A1, let me move that up for you. So we've done A1 and we've done A2. Now we gotta do our big A3 piece. So same process, we always start by finding that line between A2 and A3. And then I'm gonna come in with my cardstock and just use that to help me get a nice crisp line. So I can see that my thing shifted a little bit. I'm just going to come back in and do that again. This step really does make a difference, so really take your time getting your, let me move that up a little bit for you so that you can see that a little bit better. But it really does make a big difference on getting nice seams. So make sure that you're folding the paper back accurately and then giving yourself a nice 1/4 inch seam to work with. And then what you do is you come in with your A3 piece. So A3, and we're gonna lay it right sides together. And you'll notice A3 goes quite a ways. Now if I open this, you'll see that this is the line that we're stitching here, but you'll notice that this continues up, which is why I've left you a lot of room over here so that you can accommodate that whole area of fabric. Now you'll notice that you don't have that much to cover off here, but you do have, all of this seam allowance that you're going to need to cover off. So just be mindful of that area. So we're going to come and I'm going to shimmy this down quite a bit because I want to leave as much room up here for the A3 to flip out. And I just want to make sure that I'm going to have enough to cover off. Yep. So I just wanted to make sure that I had enough down here to cover off my seam allowance. It should do the trick. So I'm just going to pop a pin in. so that my things don't shift, and then I will take that to the sewing machine. So a couple of tips before you stitch your pieces in. I just wanted to encourage you to make sure that you take a peek at your fabric from behind and just make sure that you have a nice alignment, that things haven't shifted as you've taken it from pinning it on your board to bringing it to your sewing machine. Sometimes things get flipped, sometimes things shift, so I just encourage you to really take a moment to make sure that your pieces are accurately placed before you flip them over and bring them underneath your sewing machine. Now, at this point, see we've already done the A1 and the A2. We're doing this longer line between A3 and A2. So I'm just going to come in here, and starting right at the edge, I'm going to stitch my way down. Now on this one, I'm not going all the way into the seam allowance. You'll notice that stops at that line for between A3 and A4. So just backstitch at this point and cut your threads. So what I mean is you'll notice that there's like a little small gap there. That's the line between A3 and A4. So you're not coming all the way into the seam allowance at this point. And there you are. You've got your A3 line stitched. Now let's go press it. Okay, so we're back at pressing. This is our A2 to A3 pieces. So I'm just gonna set my seam, finger pressed first. Oh, so pretty. The beauty of foundation paper piecing is that you get really, really lovely crisp lines, which is why I've used foundation paper piecing for this part. So that's one seam done. Okay, so once you have all of your pieces stitched, so I've got A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6. So now that they're all stitched, I can now come in and trim them up. So I'm going to grab my larger ruler just to make this easier. And what you're looking to do is cut right on that, you want to cut right on the dotted line so that you preserve the seam allowance for piecing your canopies together. So I'm just going to go around and trim directly on that dotted line. So you can see how some of the pieces are quite large. I did that on purpose. As I said, if you wanted to trim them down, if you're more experienced with FPP, feel free to reduce the sizes. I just didn't want you to be short on fabric because that's never fun. I'm cutting towards myself here, which is not how I like to cut. I'm actually going to reposition it and give it a proper. And there you have your left canopy. So, sorry, your left FPP. Beautiful. Trunk FPP. So we got all of our FPP pieces done. We got our left, right, and our tree trunk. Now we can move on to do our curved canopies.